Hello and welcome to Soul Talks. And this is Sunday, the 17th of September. And we're going to talk about conflict and peace. Now, Michael Franti said, you can bomb the world to pieces, but you can't bomb it into peace. And so there sets the stage of where we want to go, but we have to deal with this human thing called conflict. And human conflict is created in duality. So one of our agreements that we have on a soul level is that when we incarnated on planet Earth, we said yes to duality. We said yes to death. We said yes to contrast. And part of contrast and part baked into the system is conflict. But inside of ourselves, we yearn for peace. How many yearn for peace? So here's the pathway to peace. In the gene keys, the shadow is conflict, the path is diplomacy, and the city is peace. And so we always know that the cities are these divine expressions of energy that really dissolve duality. Because once we see through the veil, we know that we're not two, we are actually one, playing the game of two. So that sets us in the pathway where we need to go in this conversation to talk about conflict. So first, let's presence, where are these, where's gene key 6 in your body, in the body graph of human design? Because that's going to tell us a lot. Gene key 6 is located in the solar plexus. The solar plexus is what? The emotional center, right? So human beings, can we not tell? We are becoming so emotional. And therefore, opening up new pathways of discovery, which have yet to even be revealed, and also opening up a can of worms about our capacities to even be with our emotions. So I happen to have that gate in my human design, and it is the gate of conflict. Now, in human design, juxtaposing or completing the channel of 6 is 59. And you may recall we talked about 59, intimacy. So that gives us a little clue. In the sacral is intimacy, connecting with 6, conflict, to form the channel of reproduction. So does that set the stage for something? We kind of know now that friction, that's another word for conflict, is baked into our incarnation. And we think about the sperm fertilizing the egg, the penetration, the breaking through that it takes to form a life. And this channel of reproduction is also known as the channel of intimacy. So conflict is contained inside this deep pursuit, this deep desire to be intimate, to be known, to know the other as self. This is also in the ring of alchemy. And this ring of alchemy, as we talked about last week in 47 and human suffering and pain, is here to transmute the human experience, alchemize. That's why it's the alchemy. The human experience of base level, shadow level conflict into what? And in this case, peace. There's so much to say about that. So let's hold on a second. I want to presence this ring of alchemy for a moment, because sometimes it helps to be in context. So in the gene keys, the ring of alchemy is 6. 40, we talked about 40 as the sacred no, boundaries. 47, we talked about last week as transfiguration, being the city. And 64, we haven't gotten to that yet. Or actually, I think that was in between. And so we missed that in the ring of alchemy. So listen to this. The codon ring is formed by these 4 gene keys, whose themes are diplomacy, resolve, transmutation, and imagination. So let me say those again and just feel those in your body. Diplomacy, resolve, transmutation, and imagination. So that's how the shadows are alchemized to get to the highest frequency. And remember, 2027 is when we have the opportunity to step fully into our gift frequency. So it's no accident that we are really working this shadow material right now. So much has been dying off. I mean, that new moon, oh my goddess. That new moon was also like earth shattering, shaking off things that just didn't work, don't serve, created so much chaos. So that like a new drishti, a new aim is coming forward. I digress. So this is a very powerful grouping, Richard Rudd says. The 6th gift is breaking down the barriers in human relationships. So if we go back to that 659 channel of intimacy, channel of reproduction, we're talking about relationships. The 40th gift is forging this new openness in our communities. The 47, what we talked about last week, is allowing us to transform old ways. I mean, how many old ways really have to be undone for us to go into the future? I mean, it's now apparent, like kind of all of them. And then the 64 gift is opening up to a fresh set of possibilities, imagination. Like what is possible? The imaginal world, even. The imaginal world, not the world of make-believe, but the world that lives above the earth plane where all things are possible, alchemizing this shadow into, like, remember there's a shock that has to happen. There's like the 47 represents that shock that happens so that we then have access to this realm of possibility. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, no worries, because we've been diving deep after every Sunday, deep layers. And so you would have to go back to the old YouTube recordings from like May, June, where I start talking about the worlds from Gurdjieff. And so you don't have to know anything. Like I always say, when you listen to these transmissions, listen softly, listen peripherally. Like if you listen too focused, you're like, oh, what was that? Did I get that? And that's for a different kind of study in my mind. This is more listening broadly, like letting these words sink in and ping your soul. So it says, oh, this over here, this. And sometimes when people share with me what they got out of it, it's totally different than what I said or even meant. But I trust, right, that you're going to get what you need to get. And I'm going to be here saying what is coming through. And in between is that alchemy. So if you're new, these are the gene keys. They were transmitted to us from Richard Rudd and based on the system of human design. And we use this on Sundays. I use this as a jumping off point for these soul talks. So we're in the ring of alchemy. We're learning how to alchemize our shit and create the thing, the world that we know in our souls, that we actually have imprinted in our DNA that is what's possible. So this pathway says to us, okay, we got a lot of shadows here, and this particular shadow is conflict, and there's so much conflict going on. So how do we deal with this? Well, the gift is diplomacy, and we're going to learn a little bit about what that means. Let's placeholder that and go into kind of what some of the ways that this gene key can show up. Surprisingly enough, this can show up as a people pleaser. You do not like conflict. And so you avoid it at all costs. And maybe that was a part of you before. even if you stand up for yourself in certain areas, there can be other areas where it's too tender and you don't, and you lack the confidence, or you even lack the knowing of who you are enough to raise your voice. So the repressive nature is the people pleaser. The reactive nature is the conflict driven person. And oftentimes what happens is that they attract each other. So if you are conflict avoidant, chances are you're going to pair up in relationship, because this is a relationship gene key, with someone who is not conflict avoidant. I had that experience in one relationship, and I was so incredibly curious because this person was more passive aggressive, that in our relationship dynamics, I became very irritated, very aggressive about certain things, calling things forward and being angry about it. And I realized that we're doing this polarity dance. And I once said to a friend who's going through quite a lot in a similar dynamic, that having the benefit of witnessing it from the outside, I'm like, you cannot argue yourself into peace. So part of diplomacy is going to ask you to drop the rope. And I say you because who else is there but you? It's you and you, the dance of polarity inside of you. And it only takes one person to drop the rope. If we think about it, Juanita said in our Many Mothers course the other day, you are 50% of the relationship. So you have that much control. You have at least half of the energetic control in that union. So it's a good way of looking at it, that I do have a say. And even if I'm avoiding conflict, I'm inviting it because I'm avoiding it. So how do we then have a diplomatic conversation so that we can get to peace? Well, the gene keys are really clear across the board with all of our shadows. And if you've been listening to me long enough, you know the answer to this. What is it? It is you do your own work. Stop projecting onto others. Early on in my spiritual path, I would get these self-help books and I couldn't help it, but I would be underlining and I'd be like, yep, this person needs to see this. This person needs to see this. I even remember going through the Enneagram and I was like, oh, this person is this number. And I photocopied it and highlighted it and sent it over. Holy goddess. Because I was sure that would help them. Bless my heart. No, actually it doesn't. It's when they're ready to hear, they'll hear. And in fact, that, especially even that particular Enneagram number, really is somewhat deaf to outside influences like that. But most people are too, because, the truth finds you when you're ready. And the thing that we can do is work on ourselves. And so how do we do that? Well, we get to see the other person as our mirror. I walked around saying a couple of years ago, I coined this phrase for myself, #Hall of Mirrors. When everything reveals itself, especially when I'm in plant medicine journeys, I don't know if you've ever done this, but it just reveals itself that it's all me. It's #Hall of Mirrors. Like, oh my gosh, I created that scenario because that's my inner child wanting to heal itself, blah, blah, blah. #Hall of Mirrors. So in our waking life, our ego keeps us from seeing those things. And that's what Michael Pollan calls the default mechanism. And that's why plant medicine is so great. And I've talked about this before, that it lowers the default mechanism, the ego structure of your brain, so that all the other parts of your brain can actually talk to each other and be lit up, because you know that you know more than you know. You have so much vast intelligence inside you, but we can't always access that when we have the ego filtering it. And why is the ego filtering it? Well, because the ego wants to make sure that it exists. And so it projects and blames. It's a protective mechanism. And here we go to the magic word. It is defending itself. And that right there, my friends, is the place to start with conflict. Defending yourself. We all think we have so much to defend. And so that's a beautiful inquiry when we notice that we're getting triggered. What is it that I'm defending? I often say to clients, like, give yourself a lot of space. If you get triggered, stop. There's a couple bright line rules I have. And bright line rules mean that I don't even think about whether they apply in the situation. I just always do them. Like I have a bright line rule that I don't eat gluten. I don't analyze whether it's good gluten or bad gluten or blah, blah, blah. I just don't eat it. It makes my life super easy that way. That's what bright line rules are for. So one of the bright line rules I have is if I notice I'm triggered from a text message, I do not respond. I give myself space. And it's hard, right? Like, have you ever had that feeling? You just want to respond and just shoot something back. But I give myself the space. I give myself the grace. Mostly because I know better. And I'm practicing what I preach. And that is that if I want to be a warrior of peace, a light bearer, then I'm not going to add gasoline to the fire. So I just have a bright line rule. I put the phone down. I go for a walk. I cry. I talk it out to myself, whatever I need to do. I shake it out just to dissolve that energy. And then I have the space to actually go inside. What is that? What am I making that mean for me? And usually it's some way I'm defending myself. That I'm not a bad person, that I'm lovable, just very core human things. And so once I get down to the root level, then the charge is usually gone. And if I sleep on something, then I have a better response. And I cannot tell you how many times things take care of themselves with space. I also have really good mentors and advisors around me so that things are sticky. I can work through them because I want to see the pattern that I'm up to so that I can grow, because that's what's at stake here. It's not being right that's at stake. We know the phrases about I'd rather be happy than right, but most of us would really just rather be right. Because the ego would rather be right. Why does the ego want to be right? Because then it exists, right? Like I exist. I'm right. I'm here. I'm a person. I deserve this. And really, there's what the cities teach of the Gene Keys are the 64 flavors of enlightenment, which means like you don't exist. There's no you there. There is only the perception of a you, the creation, a construct of a you called your name. And so spirit inhabiting a body is inhabiting a particular template with a particular history, a particular makeup. Just as part of the divine game, it's the divine. We are the divine. And we do maintain a particularity when we pass, but we also have more of a sense of the all of the wholeness. I remember Anita Morjani in her book, Dying to Be Me, was trying to describe this to us in her book. Like she's like, when I crossed over, it was like the lights went on and I saw, but then the lights went off and I didn't see anymore. And now I have to describe what I saw. And there's no vocabulary for that. So she was saying, I met my father when I crossed over, but he wasn't my father. He was me. And it was the past, but it was really now, but it was really the future, So she's describing a world outside of time, outside of identity, but there's still a particularity that gets preserved. And I've been diving into some of those teachings from Gurdjieff. Some of the mystics have really been able to put more words to that. And those will come out in these teachings, but let's suffice it to say for now that what's driving everything is this ego desire to be me. And that's actually perfectly appropriate because you can't be no me until you're me. it's like a state and a stage. You've got to include it and transcend it. So when it comes down to conflict, the ego wants to defend itself. Now, let's talk about defense styles. I have a great teacher, Larry Byram, who talks about each person has a particular defense style. And that defense style comes from your core wounding. Are you father wounded? Are you mother wounded? So in today's culture, we've sort of flip-flopped from like the stereotypical, let's say 1940s and 50s masculine, feminine. So now we have a lot of feminine or a lot of women who take on the masculine, who have taken on the masculine, and therefore are more what we would call dynamic in their defense style. Now, that defense style is a father wounded defense style if it's in a woman's body. If you're in a woman's body mind, then you're really disowning the feminine. And that's why it's a father wound. It's a disowning of the feminine. And so your defense style, the way that you navigate the world, is to be ordered, to be focused, to be on task. You prioritize getting shit done over connecting and relating. Now, a lot of us, I mean, that was my primary defense style. So a lot of us are softening, doing our feminine work, and therefore have more access to the feminine defense style. And there are also women who have a feminine defense style. And I'm going to talk about that more with respect to the masculine, but just placeholdering that there is a dynamic defense style that is more masculine oriented. And it can be a man or a woman or a binary person taking on, non-binary person taking on that defense style as a way, as a defensive mechanism of how I navigate the world to protect myself. Well, I know that let's say it as a dynamic defense style, I know that I'm safe if I am productive and I get shit done and my world around me is ordered and I know where I'm going and I'm goal oriented, right? Can you relate that? I mean, you can feel kind of like the safety that comes in that. And that's part of even being inside of a patriarchy, because that's how we get safe. We become proficient at those kinds of things. Now let's juxtapose it against its opposite. And I love to talk about this opposite because this defense style gets a lot of cred in the spiritual community. And I'm going to blow that up. So this defense style is called disarming. And you can already feel that it's disarming. It's a more feminine defense style. It's more chaos driven. This person feels quintessentially needy. Like, oh, and let me say about the dynamic person, the deeper wound is that she doesn't feel lovable. She's competent, but doesn't feel lovable. So inside of the disarming, it's the opposite. They don't feel competent to meet their needs, to meet the needs of other people. So oftentimes the polarity gets together because they're idealizing each other. Oh, I want you to take care of me on the love department. And then the other person says, yeah, and I want you to take care of me in the competence department. And, doesn't really go so well. At first, it creates a lot of sparks and, ooh, isn't that fun? And then it just blows up because of a lot of reasons that actually I would love to talk about. But let me finish the disarming. So the disarmings are more feminine in their defense style, really relying on chaos to solve their problems. Like somebody, I'm not going to choose or make a decision or go for something. It's just going to happen. It's just going to unfold. And people are going to miraculously just meet my needs. And I don't know. I'm disenfranchised from the level of power that I have inside of me. So you can hear some shadow feminine, you can hear some cosmic mother feminine inside of that. And that inside of a man, that is also a father wound. That is disowning his masculine power. You can see that, right? So let's see, what is there to say about that? So that's the way we handle those are the defense styles. And then there's a combination of the two. When your parents were so confusing that you didn't know which one to do, and you often do the opposite one of what someone else is doing in that time. It's really confusing. Then there's also a distant person, which their defense style is just like shut down, more like the reserved type, the people who don't have access to their emotions. That's more of a distant defense style. And there's a lot of teaching on this and a lot more, but I'm just presencing the defense style so that you can see where you are and then plot a level of competence, around a both and. Because ultimately, where we want to go is no defense style. Like we don't need to defend ourselves. And that's called pioneering. When you're able, able to bring in the masculine and get shit done when you need to, and you're able to soften and flow when you need to. Now, a lot of us are there who've been on the spiritual path. The big difference is when we get into stress. So where do we operate from when we get into stress? It's just something to notice. And it is possible to come completely out of our defenses. The more we inquire what it is we're actually defending, and then nurture and care for the one inside who needs to be protected and the one inside who is protecting, then we start to dissolve and more of our true essence, that's the best way I can put it, starts to come online. And therefore, in a conflict situation, you have more capacities. And those get tested. They get tested deeply inside of relationship. So one of the things I wanted to say about in the spiritual community, it's largely seen that go with the flow, sometimes my teacher calls them love bunnies, bliss bunnies, is actually more spiritual. And haven't you thought that yourself? Like, wow, he's so in the moment. I remember someone telling me about a story about a guy who like threw his wallet and his phone into the ocean, which let's just say he threw it in a trash can. And just was like, nope, I'm totally going to live like off the land, off the generosity of others. I don't need money. I don't need a place to sleep. And he was literally in my town. So I'm not talking about I'm not talking about like 25 AD, or I'm not talking about, in a place, I don't know, like maybe even Hawaii. I'm not even talking about that. I'm really talking about in my town in San Diego, this guy did this thing. And I thought to myself, wow, that looks spiritual. And maybe in some ways it could be, I don't know, but I felt to me like actually it's disarming. It's this person so afraid of their masculine energy and their energy to create that they've swung so far over to this feminine defense style to meet the world. And maybe, I would love to ask that person, like, what was your father like? Was he just like a brute? Because I can see where then you would say, fuck the masculine. I'm going to take on the feminine because the masculine's too hard, too hurtful. And that's really where we are in our culture. And so many of us have been in this masculine, feminine dynamic conversation that we get to understand that there's shadow and light to each one of them. And the Gene Keys is just saying, you got to do your own work. You can't bypass this work to get to peace, because even your attempts to be spiritual are bypassing your power. And you're really just elevating a wounded way of living as a peaceful way of living. So will we ever get to peace? Well, that question depends on you, and it depends on me. Are we willing to find peace here? There's no way that we can create peace in the outside unless we have peace on the inside. Because outside is inside. And that's ultimately the teaching of the Gene Keys. That's the teaching of most, if not all, mystical traditions. Above, below, outside, inside. It's one thing. So to come to peace inside yourself, of all the parts, and this is where Claire Dash and her transforming trauma and her beautiful parts work gets to come in to support us to get to know all the parts in here. Get to know all the parts in there. Have conversations with them. Make friends with yourself. And then next time you're in relationship, you're going to see yourself. And what will you do when you see yourself? Will you love yourself? Will you have compassion? That doesn't mean you need to tolerate the situation, but it's there. It's there for you to see. It's there for you to meet. And so whatever you're saying about that person is really what you're saying over here. And that's the work of Byron Katie. How can we see ourselves in a deeper way? So let's clear the fog of projection. Let's clear the fog of blame. And let's bring it all home inside of this vastness called you that can hold all of it, shadow and light. Resource yourself so that you have the spine, the strength of your spine, and the openness of your heart to take a look. And may all beings benefit from the merits of our efforts. Namaste.